Hello, I'm Mischievous Marcinacchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy number 15, and of course, all of the Amazing Spider-Man annuals, which, despite owning all of these beautiful, wonderful things, I say that those annuals do not count.
Well, I'm Dapper Dan Gavosden, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including those beautiful annuals. Love them to death. Which I say definitely count because, I mean, if I love them that much and they're a part of my heart, they should be a part of my collection. But for me, Amazing Fantasy 15 remains a fantasy.
They're beautiful, wonderful comics, Dan. Well, welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for the 8 Deaths of Spider Talk. Oh, it's a theme episode.
All right. If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review to help spread the word about our show. Apple is being really funky right now, and our reviews are just slowly disappearing every day. So we could use a few extra reviews on there. And they've also removed us from the primary search for Spider-Man on the app. So we need ways to get people to go check out the show because we won't pop up if you search for Spider-Man on Apple. It's very strange. They've doxed our show. I don't know what it is. But either way, these reviews are important as they're really the best way to spread the word about the show and indicate the size of our audience to guests and collaborators, and hopefully to teach Apple a lesson. I don't know.
The algorithms are changing everywhere, Dan. This podcast exists because of the support of our Patreon members. If you want to receive early episodes and exclusive artwork and keep this podcast going, go to amazingspidertalk.com and consider joining our Patreon. In fact, we are releasing this episode of the show early to Patreon supporters and non-Patreon supporters alike. What? That's right. For the start of the 8 Deaths of Spider-Man, we felt like it's a good jumping on point for you guys. So if you dig this episode and want to keep up with our coverage of this 10-issue story, please consider joining our Patreon. If you join this week, you'll have access to 3 new interviews we've done that haven't been released to the public yet. So join us for our conversations with Todd DeZago, Alex Segura, Enid Balam, and many more by signing up for our Patreon at amazingspidertalk.com.
Yeah, and all of the Patreon subscribers who've already listened to those 3 interviews have really been raving about them. I think there's some really great ones from us. I mean, obviously we're a little bit biased, but you and I sat down with Balam and Todd DeZago, and I sat down with Alex by myself. But, I think we got some really crackling interviews out of these. So even if these names aren't familiar to you, I think you're going to get a lot out of these interviews.
Absolutely, Dan. We're crackling. I like that word. Just crackling,
Look, we did 3 interviews in 3 days. So, crackling is about all I've got left in me.
There you go.
But today on the show, Mark and I will discuss Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 61. This is the first issue of the 8 Deaths of Spider-Man arc, I guess we're getting it, or mini-series, whatever you want to call it. It's a bunch of issues that are predominantly led by Joe Kelly. So on that note, this issue was written by Joe Kelly. The cover features artwork by Ed McGuinness and Marcio Menyz. The interior pages feature pencils by Ed McGuinness, inks by Mark Farmer, and colors by Marcio Menyz, 2 double-page spreads by Nico Henrichon, and, of course, letters by VC's Joe Caramagna. This issue was first released on November 13th, 2024. I guess the way to start this is, we're going into the 8 Deaths of Spider-Man. It is inherently a, Doctor Doom magic story, which is not something we're used to in the pages of Spider-Man. I can, count on my fingers the number of, truly heralded Doctor Strange or magic Spidey stories. So my inherent question that I had to ask for myself was, does this still feel like a Spidey comic, despite that deviation? And I have an answer, but I want to hear from you, Mark. What do you think of this as the start of a new story? Did it feel like Spidey to you?
Um, I mean, honestly, it's kind of inconclusive to me. I mean, I'm leaning towards no if I'm being completely blunt about it. I mean, yes, the first half of it kind of goes through the paces, if you will, to kind of set up the Spidey circumstances, and you know, to Joe Kelly's credit, this was only like, you know, it was a few notches less unhinged than like his Savage Spider-Man or nonstop Spider-Man story, just in terms of like the nonstop patter of it. I mean, not to get into the sausage making here, folks, but like I had texted Dan a few times before we recorded tonight, just to basically be like, Joe, I have a hard time personally with Joe Kelly's narrative style. And you know, we talked a little bit about it in our last episode, even in the preview, and he's not really breaking the rule that I called him out for in that last episode, in terms of like shifting narratives, but like I find Joe Kelly's narrative storytelling approach to be very disorienting. I mean, like, you know, even like, you know, he's got, you know, we open and it's Spidey and he's got Kevin, and I'm like, who's Kevin? We don't know. He's a guy.
Yeah.
He's a guy, and there's a villain, and it's Burnout, but we're calling him Sparky, and, you know, we're making Scott Pilgrim jokes, and everything is just flying so fast, and I feel like the hit percentage of the jokes is like 25 to 30%, which is still probably like a higher by volume number of jokes than maybe in moments of the Zeb Wells run, but like, you know, but there's also just a lot of stuff falling flat for me, you know, because it's just we're just throwing everything out there. We're throwing characters, we're throwing jokes, we're throwing, you know, Ed McGuinness crazy art in your face, and it's a lot to take in all at once in these opening pages. So like, even the part where I felt was grounded in the Spidey mythos more than anything else, I had a hard time settling in, because it's intentionally disorienting, in my opinion, in terms of just how much it's throwing at you. And then we get into this Doom story and all this exposition about Scions and Sideracs and Syntrons, and it's, you know, like, we can dissect this obviously in a lot more depth over the next, you know, 40 minutes or so, Dan, or however long this is going to take us. But like, the chief thing that I am going to be looking for over the course of the story is, okay, we have seen Spidey in some crazy circumstances before that don't feel necessarily at home in a Spider-Man comic. With that said, they have to be done in a way that brings home the grounded stakes of Spider-Man in a way. You know, we go through all this setup about Spidey and his personal life, and, you know, he's ruining his gifts for Randy and Shay, and Aunt May's disappointed in him. So you feel like we're setting up the stakes, but then we go into a storyline where those stakes don't factor one iota into it, and that's a little disconcerting for me as an opening part to this story. Like, it just felt very foreign, and like, you know, we were telling a Spider-Man story, sorta, and now we're off doing this mystical stuff, and I don't know how we're going to reconcile all of it.
I definitely want to talk about Joe Kelly's kind of writing style, but like, let's just kind of keep it on the kind of narrative elements, which I think you were leaning into mostly. You know, like, to me, this felt like two different comics, like shoved together. And I don't think it had to. You know, and maybe this will like find its way out over the next few issues once we see the more clear arc. But as like a single issue story, you're right. My biggest problem with this issue is it does set up these very clear Spider-Man stakes of like, you can't do both things. You know, the being Spider-Man is going to, you know, hurt Peter Parker's life, and vice versa. The whole idea of like both Spider-Man and Peter Parker can't win. Now, you can argue whether you feel like that is a real theme of Amazing Spider-Man or not. And I have read Nick Lowe and, you know, more of the writers in the Brand New Day era really argue for that being paramount. And you and I have made that case you know, many times, and I think the Zeb Wells run has been largely about that kind of thing too. You But what this kind of is similar to the Zeb Wells run is in the Zeb Wells run, we had like a mystical force that had nothing to do with Peter come in and damage a major part of his life, right? Like the loss of Mary Jane is really not related to him being Spider-Man in any way, shape, or form. It was a like act of God that came out of nowhere and did it. And to me, the Doom element of this feels very much the same of that. Now, it doesn't quite have the like character altering stakes of the all the stuff done with Rabin and Mary Jane and all that, and Paul, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And honestly, not that I wanted that, but I want something like that, to tie it into Spider-Man's world, because, like the Spidey can't win. I guess you could say that maybe that's at play here because he runs off to be Spider-Man, but like nothing about the second half of this comic with all the magic and stuff feels like it's a part of a Spider-Man story.
No, you could have inserted literally any other hero into those circumstances and have the same result, in my opinion, which is problematic.
Yeah, and so I think like that's a real problem. Like, and the story that I was thinking about when I was reading this was the like cosmic Spider-Man story, which is like Spider-Man gets all the powers of Captain Universe, and he's all powerful. But he still ends up solving that problem in a way that only Spider-Man or Peter Parker could solve it,
Yeah, and I think like a big part of that story too, not to talk about an older story, which we might end up talking about in our upcoming season or close or soon, is that like Spider-Man is very like uncomfortable with those powers and how to wage them and like it ultimately like circles back to it becoming a Spider-Man problem, which is like, it's what is the ultimate Spider-Man lesson? With great power, there must also come great responsibility. And, in this instance, I mean, I guess we'll see how in the next issue, how Spider-Man takes on the responsibility of, well, if I die 7 more times, I fail the universe. But like, at this point, it's, he kind of rebuffs Doom and then gets into it with Citron, Fresca, whatever you want to call the guy. Like I said, I legitimately was like, is this a Doctor Strange villain? Is this someone from like the Negative Zone in a Fantastic Four comic?
Yeah.
Like I looked it up. I don't usually do that level of research.
You made
when
Mark do homework. Oh,
I did
God.
homework
Yeah.
for a recap, people. Come on. And I was like, oh wait, no, this character was just created for this. But the point being that like he gets into this fight and it's just like, okay, never mind, I'm gonna take you up on your offer, Doom. It didn't click as like a Spider-Man, like I have to, this is my responsibility, this is my obligation. If it's not me, then it's nobody. The fact that Strange apparates to him after the fact to be like, oh, by the way, this is what you gotten yourself into. Like, these are all things that, like, we're playing kind of like, Mad Lib Spider-Man here, where it's like, well, Spider-Man's impetuous. Okay, so we're going to go with that here, but we're really not going to, like, actually fill in the blanks in a sensible way with these other elements of his, core elements of his character, and now we are where we're at the end of this first issue.
Yeah, and I think all of that is true, and I think the big thing that like really took me out of this, and I like this story decently. I had fun with it, but like what I don't buy into it as a first issue of a big story is I think none of the stakes are established well here. Like the threat of Doom does not seem present at all because like Doom doesn't even really seem that interested in Spidey. Like Spidey tells him no, and then Doom's like, okay, fine, see you later. Like even when like Luke refuses the call on the typical hero's journey in A New Hope, Obi-Wan pushes back. He's like, that's your uncle talking, you know, like there's no pushback from Doom here. Like, and so if Spidey can just tell Doom to screw off, why should we really care about Spidey's involvement in this, you know? And then like the scions of Cyttorak, you know, don't really have, you know, much stake to them either because they don't really have much character. Like we don't really get anything from their perspective or Cyttorak as a villain. It's this nameless, faceless thing that we're told about from Doom. And the first one goes down without even thinking. Now, yes, Peter dies, but like that also undermines the stakes of him dying. He doesn't seem, for someone who has really not died much in the history of Spider-Man, if you choose to ignore the hundreds of times that Kindred killed him, which I would like to never think about again.
Well, like not for nothing, I thought about that while reading this because you know, to me it's probably the most recent example of Spider-Man dying, and like I was like, hey, at least that felt like it meant something. And like you said, it was just like, I'm gonna punch him now. Oops, I'm punching a black hole. I like was that, did I miss something in the setup? Like was it set up like if I punch this guy, I could, you know, here I could possibly, you know, disintegrate or whatever you want to call it. No, like none of that's set up, right? It's just he does it, and then it's like, oops, now I'm dying. Like, did I misread that? Or
I mean,
or that...
there's something, you know, like if you do go, like theoretically, if you went into a black hole, it would, you know, stretch time and space, and it would turn you into spaghetti, you know. But there is a setup that's like he suddenly learns all of these things from Doom giving him these powers about how magic works and how to use it, which like allows us to skip past the whole like I'm training you to use magic thing,
right?
You know, but it does feel like a weird like win button, or like a hey, let's just suddenly transform this guy into not Spider-Man, you know. And I'm okay with Spider-Man getting an upgrade, right? Like, or getting some new device if he uses it in a Spider-Man-y way. And I guess you could maybe argue here that like black holes are science and Peter is intellectual about that stuff, and so therefore he is able to apply science and magic to take this guy out. But like if that's what he was going for, I don't feel like he put enough in to like make that connection there, you know. And you know, to these kind of scions, like it's funny that Joe Kelly makes a Scott Pilgrim joke here, which I didn't get and had to look up because it is a 15-year-old movie. You know, there's 8 ex-boyfriends, right? Like in Scott Pilgrim, and we have 8 deaths here, right?
Right.
Or 8 scions, right? To me, it seems very clear that this is like a Scott Pilgrim, mirror story, right? Like, I mean, it's right there in the text, right? But each of the villains that Scott Pilgrim fights in that, well, first of all, he has like a whole graphic novel for each of them. So like, it's not really fair to compare them, but like each one of them challenges Scott in a way that's a reflection of Scott Pilgrim, or let's just learn more about Ramona Flowers, you know? And like, I don't feel like, I mean, it's only one in an issue that set it all up, but like, I haven't bought into it enough yet, you know, for those characters or that threat to really feel personal or like something I'm excited to go on that journey on in the way that Scott Pilgrim's does without even really thinking about it.
Right. No, I mean, yeah, I mean, I agree with all that. I you know, at the end of the day, you know, like, it's not even that it's not even that I don't care. It's just like I don't feel like the work is being done here to truly outline what the stakes are for Spider-Man. You know, this is you know, like you inserted my famous rivet gun line into the recap, but like, you know, my other, you know, thing that I like to complain about with story. I mean, this is ultimate, like, you know, telling, not showing, storytelling. It's just like, okay, you know, things are happening, and then, you know, whether it be, you know, the exposition blobs on the painted art pages about, what's happening here, or, when Strange himself shows up and it's just like, so this is what's happening, and you're going to die, but you can't die this many times. Like we're not, nothing is being explained in a way that has, here's another Markism, with any gravitas or build or just drama behind it. It's just, we're transitioning from scene to scene to scene without there really being any kind of emotional connective tissue that makes me want to be like, okay, I'm in, like, how's he gonna get himself out of this one? Like, I haven't felt that yet, and I watched Spider-Man die in a comic, so like, that's a little odd to me.
Yeah, and I feel like there's also a missed opportunity at, like, the Scions of Sidorak thing isn't something we've ever seen in a comic before. Like, right. Like, it's implied that Strange had this whole adventure that we just didn't see, and now Spidey has to pick it up. But, like, it's because we don't have anything to compare it to. Like, for example, if you were to do, like, a 10-issue story that's like Spider-Man, like, is given these powers and he has to take down Galactus, we would go, well, we've seen other people take down Galactus, right? We've seen the Fantastic Four do it, but, like, Spider-Man's not as smart as, Mr. Fantastic. He can't go invisible. He's not made of rock, and he doesn't have flames, like, so, like, and he doesn't have access to, the, what's the gun that he uses to take out Galactus, the nullifier, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, like, how does Spider-Man, this grounded hero that can shoot webs, take down Galactus? Well, that's exciting initially because I've seen someone else do it, but now I want to see how Spider-Man does it. In the same way that the Fire Lord issue is fun, right? Which is,
he can't punch out Fire Lord, Dan, and you know it.
Yeah, no, and I do kind of agree with that, but but that's what makes that fun,
Yeah.
But, like, there's no precedent for this, so we just have to kind of like trust us, bro.
Yeah, source, trust me, bro.
Yeah. So anyway, like I think, like, that's a missed opportunity, and it's not like there's not an endless ocean of older stories to pull from that you could just even other Sidorak stories, I'm sure, and that's not to begrudge Joe Kelly, like, to doing this, but, like, it's a missed opportunity there. But there are also things I liked, like, about this kind of setup. Like, I think the bureaucracy of, like, Coulson as the sort of, like, almost Beetlejuice-esque, like death as a sort of, like, business, I think could be really fun, and I expect we're going to be revisiting that character every time Spider-Man dies, unless he never dies again, which would be a very weird story choice. So,
the 8 deaths, except we'll only get one. I mean, look, if there was an editor that could miscount to that level, we might have that editor right now.
That is very true. Yeah, an editor that has a first issue of a new story where the first half of the story has nothing to do with the second half of the story. But anyway, enough said about that. I think the team up of Doctor Strange and Spider-Man 2 Ditko heroes is always a good time.
Yeah, and we've had good story. I mean, not that they team up a lot, but we've had memorable stories with the two of them. So, like, it's not like it's an impossible pairing by any stretch.
Yeah, and also, like, we'll get into talking about the details of McGuinness, but I thought the visuals were great in this. And even the magic stuff, like, as weird as it was, I was, like, kind of sold on it as, like, a fun visual exploration to spend a few issues on. And then also, like, we just got done. Well, we didn't just get done, but we did a whole season of our show on Roger Stern, which was ostensibly, like, his whole run is Spidey in fish out of water scenarios, and so, like, this is another one of those. I just hope that it leans more on the Spidey than the out of water. Yep. So, I still think there's an opportunity for this to be a very fun story. It's just, it didn't, line up all the dominoes for me. Now, in the back of the book, there's obviously like an introduction to Joe and some behind the scenes stuff from Nick Lowe about how this all happened.
You're going to read some letters pages, aren't you, Dan?
I'm not going to read the letters pages, but I do think there's an interesting bit of information there for the show and kind of news about the Spider-Man line. Apparently, this whole thing came about happening because Nick Lowe enjoyed the Beyond run and what that was like to transition from one major run to another to do a kind of smaller thing. And he's been trying to get Joe Kelly to do Amazing Spider-Man for a long time, but he's super busy with TV and movies and all that stuff and his own company that he runs. And so this is kind of what he could get Joe Kelly to do. And I think the implied thing there is Joe Kelly is not doing a sustained run of Amazing Spider-Man after these issues just because his time is so limited. But he also mentions bringing in Justina Ireland, who didn't write on this issue, for future issues. And he implies like there's a reason why, but they'll talk about that later. I don't know what you take away from that. I have a couple of thoughts about it, but talk about the Joe Kelly run and your reaction to that, and then and this kind of idea of these transition arcs. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I don't. As a concept, I don't mind it. We're in a new era of comics. It's not the 80s or the 90s anymore. It's not even the 2000s, Dan. It's the you know what I mean? Yeah. I can understand. I mean, I do think in retrospect, unsurprisingly, frankly, Beyond was too much. But I do like the idea of these 8 to 10 issue type transition stories to kind of set up whatever the long-term plan is for the next 2 to 3 years that follow that. I think that's a good strategy to just kind of get the ducks in the row. I mean, heck, I know I said 30 seconds ago it's not the 80s or 90s anymore, but in the next season of our seasonal content.
I was just going to say, you started reading this book in a transition.
Yeah, I mean, it was Craven's Last Hunt. It was the Mad Dog Ward. It was, a couple of John Byrne, Alex Saviuk issues with David Michelinie. I mean, we had not settled into Michelinie McFarlane immediately following DeFalco and Friends. And, part of that was, frankly, because of editorial dysfunction, which does not seem to be the case there's not just, I guess your definition of dysfunction may vary. But no, there has been long-term stability in the Spider office in terms of who is calling the shots and who is making the decisions in terms of it being Nick Lowe. So I don't mind it. And I do think it's a good opportunity to use these transition periods to do something a little off the wall. It doesn't mean that I am obligated to like it, which so far I'm the jury's out. But I do like let's have Ben Reilly be the main character for a couple of months. Let's have Spider-Man have mystical powers for a couple of months. Let's put Spider-Man and MJ back together and then break them up in a couple of... No, I'm kidding. Don't do that, for the love of God. But let's play around with the form a little bit. I think it's good. Radical change and disorientation is a good thing in comics. It keeps it fresh. I'm not opposed to this. All that said, you're still gonna have to sell me, the reader, on the qualities of the story of what you're doing, and we will continue to judge it as such, even during these transition periods.
Yeah, I like this too. My only beef with Beyond is I think there were a couple writers in the soup who were clearly doing something different than everybody else, and it could have been tighter managed. And I think that ending, I don't know if it was Nick Lowe or marketing that demanded that ending. But it did, I thought a smaller contained thing would have a more tightly crafted ending to it. And the other thing I'll add is I like these ideas. I mean, look, we've known that Wells was going to be leaving the book by 60 for over a year. Mm-hmm. So whatever's replacing Joe Kelly, I hope is something that has either been cooking for a long time or they had to wait till the right time to get them on the book. But my big thing about these transitions arc is if it allows someone to get ahead and really plan out what's coming next for a bi-weekly title, then great. Do I think that there was evidence of that during the Zeb Wells run? No, I don't. And maybe that Joe is someone completely divorced from who is coming next, and Zeb Wells wasn't. He kind of still had to manage beyond. It didn't give him as much time, and this one might for the next crew. Great.
Yeah.
The proof will be in the pudding. Now, about the Justina Ireland comment. There's been some talk about does that mean that Justina Ireland is going to be a part of the next creative team on the book? I mean, she's only done those 3, Blood Hunt issues, which were okay. It wouldn't really instill confidence in me about someone coming on in a very long term. Although I know Alan speaks very well of her YA books. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to judge her by like a 3-issue miniseries about Morbius and Lizard. But my read on this is not that she is going to be a part of the creative team, although as much as I've been chomping at the bit for a sustained run from a female writer, I think that there are going to be issues of this story, of the 8 Deaths of Spider-Man, that are going to lean into her strengths. We know she's doing, I think, issue 65, which is previewed to be a tour through Spider-Man's hearts and memories and all that stuff. And they've already been talking about how great of an issue it is. So I think that's what Nick Lowe was talking about. I think he's just saying you'll see her inherent strengths when we get to the ones that she is on.
Yeah, I mean, look, I read the Blood Hunt mini. If you asked me to recall specifics about it, I don't know if I could because it kind of didn't leave much of an impression on me. So I'm not. I mean, with all that said, I'm not gonna prejudge what Ireland does or doesn't do on this book over the next few issues or the long haul. I mean, I will reserve my judgment until I read it in the context of an issue of Amazing Spider-Man, I guess, you know what I mean? But I also, nothing would surprise me right now, I guess, is what I would say. Maybe they have something in mind with her over the long haul, or maybe there is some other name or person out there that is coming, or maybe it's going to be another 8-issue transition. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows?
I do agree with you that with Beyond, because Zeb was so clearly the puppet master of that storyline, it didn't feel quite as going from something experimental to Zeb Wells. It just kind of felt like I mean, even with the different voices involved that didn't always match, I kind of just think of everything from the end of Spencer to 60 as Zeb Wells with guest creators involved. You know what I mean? So we'll see what happens. But I think we're also in an era where it's just getting increasingly hard to predict. I mean, yes, we knew that, or you knew, and you told me, and I was like, okay, I guess Dan's right, that Zeb was going to be leaving at issue 60. He knew. I will say that, folks. Dan knew for a really long time, and I was like, are you sure about this? He's like, trust me. He's gone at 60, and then I don't know what's going to happen next. And then you actually predicted Joe Kelly, and I'm just like, what?
That I didn't know. That was a complete stab in the dark.
Yeah. I was like, what kind of demon magic are you into, Dan? But yeah, I mean, that seemed to be telegraphed for people reading solicits, maybe. I don't know. But I also think we're in the era where it's going to get harder to predict for a book like Amazing Spider-Man what the long-term direction and plan and creative pairing is going to be. It's just a hunch of mine.
Well, to throw another wrench into the mix, on I think it was on X, which we'll talk about in a second. Ryan Stegman and Donnie Cates had someone tweeting at them like, "Boy, it would be really great to see like Stegman and Cates back in the Spidey world handling a major book," and both of them retweeted it with a winky face. So I think they've played coy with this for a long time. Their desire to tackle Spider-Man, and I know Stegman is kind of headlining X-Men at the moment, but I'll make no secret that I would be a huge fan of the idea of a returning Donnie Cates post-accident, whatever state his mind is in, and Ryan Stegman coming on this book and doing what they did to Venom. Like, if anybody could fix Spider-Man, the guys that fixed Venom would, I think would be a fairly safe bet.
All right. Well, do you want to go into the next section, Dan, or
sure,
do you want
Mark.
me to?
Well, if you want to join us in that hotbed of conspiracy, we've got a great place to do so. Mark, why don't you tell us about it?
Oh man, as if there are not enough places on the internet for conspiracies, Dan. Well, hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more. Dan, what's going on in the Slack this week?
Well, not to create like a turducken here, but this is going to be an ad for a social media platform in another social media platform. So come join the Slack. It's great. But in the Slack, we've actually all been kind of excitedly talking about Blue Sky. And if you don't know, Blue Sky is like was basically created as a Twitter alternative from the creator of Twitter, the ex-Jack Dorsey. I'm not a fan of this guy, but he kind of took a lot of his original ideas of what old Twitter was like and created this thing, Blue Sky. And I remember, like a year ago, Mark, I was like, you need to get on Blue Sky. And
I did. And then my account sat dormant for a year.
Yeah. And, I think that was true of most people. They came in and they were like, this is really cool, but there's not enough people here to make this special. And I think in that year since, we've all watched or Twitter completely disintegrate. Not only being like completely, full of like porn bots and right-wing, talking points and advertising, and removing of key features and functions that we all liked about Twitter. Like the search functionality is outright broken. Blocking no longer blocks people. It's just a mess. And then add on to that it probably helped to reelect Donald Trump, however you feel about that. I think a lot of people finally were like, I'm done contributing to this platform that has gotten demonstrably worse since Elon Musk took over. And I think the election was kind of like a sticking point for a lot of people, and people all jumped into Blue Sky, which is to say, Blue Sky is now amazing. It is old Twitter. There's no algorithm. It's all like chronological feeds. It's not pushing stuff on you. There's no advertising. It's not even owned by like a tech guru. It is like a conglomerate of people that will never be allowed to take full control over it, and so it won't be allowed to devolve in the same way. You can block people, and they're gone. It's been really wonderful, and I see that you dipped your toes back into Blue Sky. Was that at my urging, or because it's all the rage at the moment?
Well, look, real talk here on Amazing Spider Talk for a second. I disengaged from a lot of social media in the days following the election because it was essentially a mental health choice for me. I just did not want to get fed with some of the negativity and just post-traumatic stress from people to feed my own stress of things. So so part of it was just out of sheer necessity. I have kind of beyond you, Dan, I have other friends too that are like getting into Blue Sky, and they're like, oh, they're sending me links on like Messenger and stuff like that. And I'm like, all right, let me take a look. So like I say that I'm on there. I'm chasing ASM blog again. You can find me there. I don't know if I'm gonna be sharing vintage comic book stuff yet or what, but like I'm slowly but surely reacclimating to some things and kind of figuring out what my boundaries are in terms of people gathering on social media and screaming into the void about something. There's less screaming into the void on Blue Sky. I will say that for certain. It seems, like if you're following comic book things, people are talking about comics. If you're following baseball things, people are talking about baseball, which, I mean, like, honestly, Dan, that's what I was always on Twitter for. It was either Spider-Man or the Mets. I'm a simple guy, but
that's what makes it so thrilling is like, I say thrilling in that, like, it's like back to the way it used to be, but it's all chronological. So like if you're following an event, you can actually see people on Blue Sky. It's called skeeting, which is going to take me a while to get used to.
Sure.
But, because it sounds dirty, but I like you can actually follow stuff in real time and refer back to things. And my favorite thing about it, and this will be a plug for my account, which is at Dan Gavazden, is there's these things called starter packs where you can create a list of up to 150 people. And so I created one for comics podcasters. And I've got about 100 different comic podcaster handles in there. And you can just click on it and say, follow all.
Yeah.
Or at least go through it and curate what ones you sound interested in. And so it's a great way to share, like, who you should actually be following instead of everybody just skeeting into the void, right?
Yeah.
People are curating it and pointing people in a good direction. I've got one for a starter pack for Spider-Man creators. So you can click on a button and every person that's worked on a Spider-Man book that I could find on Blue Sky is on there, and you can then get updates from them. And I think it's going to be a really cool service and a great way to create what I've always been looking for, which is a less toxic environment for discussing comics. And so the Slack, which this is ostensibly an ad for, has the least toxic and most specific discussions that I think you'd look for in regards to Spider-Man and our community. And that's where they hang out. But I also would encourage everybody to check us out on Blue Sky. We've even got a starter pack for everybody who's in the Slack to follow each other. So I think it's going to be another extension of our brand. Move over X or Twitter, like Dan and Mark, I think, are going to be on Blue Sky. So come join in the fun on Blue Sky and in the Slack. There's a link to both our handles for Blue Sky in the description to this episode, and a link to the Slack. I'm all about in the post-election, or really just always, healthier places to hang out with your digital time. So that's what this has been about. So let's make our way back to the content about Amazing Spider-Man. Mark, I want to talk about Ed McGuinness, a guy who I think has been really growing on us. But now he kind of gets to kick off a major storyline here. What'd you think of his work in this book?
I mean, yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, he had been growing on me during the Zeb Wells run in the first place. Like, I kind of felt that. Well, I mean, we talked about this during the Zeb run. I felt Zeb always did a good job kind of writing to the artists, if you will. But like this actually feels like a more organically aligned pairing. McGuinness with Kelly really works here. Yeah, I mean, there's some things we can kind of pick some nits with, I think, but like overall, like I know I kind of criticized the narrative of that opening page, but like that art just like pops and is beautiful and is in your face and kind of like leans into the disorientation of Kelly's narrative, and I think it's a really good match in terms of a writer and an artist here.
Yeah, because I think like McGuinness is not going super silly with this.
No.
I think Zeb overplayed how much control he gave McGuinness, and I can't claim to know who's doing what in here, but I like, especially knowing like that issue 59, which we praised, was really Zeb handing over the reins to JRJR to do whatever he wanted with that fight. I kind of feel like Zeb had a less hands-on approach with the scripting, and Joe Kelly, say what you will about him, but I get the feeling that he's a fairly tight scripter. Would be my imagination if like you read one of his scripts, and I think McGuinness seems to work better that way. Like at least reading this issue, if that's any indication, I agree with you. I think the opening of this is really exciting. I liked the disorientation of it, and I think the first issue is fun where you're seeing all the falling items and Spidey reflected in the lens of the camera and the man's face like in an extreme close-up screaming. I mean, it's a striking visual to kick off a story with and slowly kind of build out. So I think they did a really good job together. I mean, the monsters look monstrous. Am I in love with this redesigned suit? No, I don't know that I feel like design is like Ed McGuinness's hobby necessarily. To me, that suit feels like it's halfway between three different designs: Doom, Strange, and Spider-Man, which
Sure.
is like maybe how it should feel. I don't know. I don't even know if I love McGuinness's Doom. He's got this weird large chin. But I think overall this is a pretty like gorgeous looking book, and representative of top talent being on Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah, and like, to be fair, I don't know if I had the issues that you have with the with the new suit. I mean, it's a little out there, but like, I don't know. I think it kind of works for the circumstances for the most part in terms of what they're trying to get across. It would have been nice to get more exposition around it, but that's neither here nor there, I guess.
It does feel really just inserted in, like,
yeah.
And even the pose that Spidey has when we first see it is not particularly dynamic of like a big introduction of a suit.
Sure.
But it looks decent enough. It's not going to be a favorite suit of mine.
Okay, that's fair. And what did you think of Nico Henrichon's like painted pages?
I thought they were really gorgeous. I mean, if you're going to do something like that, to kind of bring in those kind of mythos pages with that style, like adds a lot to the sort of like history of it. And I thought like the whole no barriers, no panels element of it could be very confusing. Where the eye follows, but like Nico does a great job of it, and I know it's probably also down to like Joe Caramagna's letter placement, about how the eye reads across the page, and so I thought like, painterly styles don't always work on a comic book page, but this really worked for me, even if I found the exposition dump of the narrative not the most exciting.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else on the art team you wanted to mention, or do you want to kind of end it with Joe Kelly himself?
I mean, it's hard not to mention Marcio Menyz, who still I think is maybe one of the best colorists to ever do it on a book like this, and giving him like particle effects and magic and stuff to render, is always a great deal of fun. This one doesn't feel quite as dramatic as some of the stuff that like I'm used to seeing from him, but I think he's just an incredible colorist, and it would be wrong of me not to mention it.
All right. Well, let's talk about Joe Kelly. I think probably of all the elements of the book, at least in terms of how Joe Kelly's narrative style approach, this might be where we are the most in disagreement here, Dan. I alluded to it in my kind of opening rant. I read Joe Kelly, and especially this Joe Kelly, yes, I do concede that it is a dialed down version of that we've had in maybe like some non ASM books over the last few years, but like it's I feel like Joe Kelly writes dialogue and scene play like it's a being shot out of a machine gun. It's just so much happening at once. And it's, my brain has a hard time processing how Joe Kelly paces things. I think he is sometimes thinking too far ahead with his jokes, to the point that he blows 3 or 4 jokes just to land one good one. I think that he is thinking too far ahead with his references, where he blows a couple of them just to point out, hey, that's a Scott Pilgrim reference, which, by the way, I would never have gotten. And also, why are we talking about Scott Pilgrim in a Spider-Man book right now? You know what I mean? Like, I am just not comfortable reading a Joe Kelly book. And I'm not saying like not comfortable like in a, oh, it makes me, feel triggered kind of a way. I just mean like I have a hard time kind of submitting to the narrative when it just feels like so much is kind of arresting my senses here and being fired at me that I'm like, okay, what do I actually need to pay attention to, and what is just like utter nonsense that is going to be, completely gone and forgotten, i.e. the first half of this book. Where do you land on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can land more positive on it than you do, but I can't refute any of the things that you said, because I often agree with those things simultaneously. I think, yes, it's like a machine gun, but it's also like, I think he really struggles with transitions between jokes or scenes, because like, just as you're trying to wrap your head around one thought, it's moving on to the next, as if like it's like almost like a verbal diarrhea of some sort. But they're not. It's not as smooth as the flow of diarrhea, like if you will, Mark. If I'm going to extend this
phrases I didn't think we would hear on Amazing Spider Talk, but here we are.
Look, me, Mr. Smooth Talker, right here. So, like, take a lesson, Joe Kelly. This is how you connect an idea to another idea.
This is how you have smooth diarrhea.
Okay. So, but like, what I mean to say that is like, it's like these are very like specifically like chunked out. I'm leaning into it again. But each idea is like an island, into itself, a floater, if you will. But they don't necessarily blend like or organically from one to the next. I am digging a hole here for myself. It reminds me, maybe not like an Ultimate Spider-Man related, but it reminds me of some of like Jonathan Hickman's more kind of like elevated stories, like his Avengers run, where like he's clearly laying something out, and I know that he gets it. But I think his confidence in the audience to get it is like way overconfident. And the same is true with like Joe Kelly's approach to humor. It's like maybe like it all makes sense to him, but he's not giving us enough to really make the connections. And so when you're working so hard to get the joke on each thing, it gets hung up. It doesn't have that flow. So I agree with you on that. And I think that's definitely present in this book. Yeah. But I also think like in some regards it worked in some of the places where it was utilized here. Like Spider-Man pulling off this huge acrobatic thing while fighting a guy and saving another guy, and just having verbal diarrhea of these jokes. Like to me, that is characteristic of Spider-Man, that he would use humor as a anxiety mechanism, like and that the jokes don't all land, I think is also very Spider-Man. Like if you read the Stan Lee run, like he's just firing jokes off nonstop, and not all of them are funny. Like I got a real legit laugh out of Temu Doctor Strange. Like, is it going to age like milk?
Yes,
absolutely,
100%.
Yeah.
But it was good in the moment, for sure.
Yeah, and did Stan Lee's like pop culture references age like milk? Yes, absolutely. I mean, they did.
There's like George Burns jokes in Stan Lee or whatever. So and I would, and to be positive, what I will also say is this is probably the most effortlessly we have been in Peter's head and in Peter's perspective. You know what I mean? Like even when Zeb, I always felt, and maybe this is unfair of me, that when Zeb kind of got inside Peter's head, he almost had to make a show of it, because like the fact of the matter is, both in large swaths of the Dan Slott run and also the Nick Spencer run, like we just got so far away from like Peter being the main character, you know, like you know, it wasn't always his story. It was Harry's story or MJ's story or, you know, Doc Ock's story or whatever, you know, whatever, whoever the creator was in the moment. And, you know, even with like Doctor Strange showing up and Doctor Doom showing up and everything, like this was very clearly a Peter story.
Absolutely.
And like, you know, the fact that we have to kind of call that out and celebrate it, I mean, probably speaks to larger issues in the Spider Office right now, but that's neither here nor there. Like, that's good. This is a good thing, you know, like this is, it is good to write a Spider-Man book from Spider-Man's perspective. Thank you, Joe Kelly, for doing that in a way where it didn't feel like you were actually looking for a round of applause to do it. You just did it, you know, like that's praiseworthy in my opinion.
And it seems like he's having a lot of fun doing it, you know, which makes me have fun. You know, like I can feel an energy in this book that's like, oh, I'm having a good time being here. So I wanted to ask you about this. Like, you know, this leans back into the kind of like thing I think a lot of people have been frustrated from, like the Brand New Day run, kind of like reestablishing like as a kind of core tenet of Peter, and I would argue that it's, you know, like probably an exaggerated version of what like Romita and Lee and Ditko did, you know, beyond what they did, which is like Peter the eternal screw up, you know, like it's one thing where like, you know, he can't show up for a date because of Spider-Man. It's another thing for him to like be so all over the place, losing every, you know, item, you know, his wallet, his camera, his whatever. And I honestly thought that was building to some kind of reveal of some kind, and maybe it is, but it wasn't here. But like, what do you think about like this characterization of Peter? And then do you think that it's a fair kind of follow up to like what Zeb Wells did with the character?
That's, I don't know how to answer that. I mean, is it fair? No, I don't think it's fair. I think we kind of, but like, I feel like at the same time, this kind of seems to be the way with Spider-Man. Like we are constantly bringing this character back to this place, whether we want him to be or not. You know, I'm not surprised by it. I guess that's more what I would say at this point. Do I like it? No, I don't like it. I wish we can see some semblance of growth here, you know, and no, this isn't me saying like growth is having a certain relationship but like, you know, like, yes, I think Peter struggling to balance Spider-Man with his normal life will always remain a core part of his character, and should be a core part of his character.
I agree.
We you know, he should not figure it out. Wins should not come easily for Peter Parker. You know what I mean? Like you know, but like, should Peter be giving his new love interest a burned record? I don't know. I mean, like, it's a sight gag. I got that, you know, so like there was no harm in it, but like, you know, you would think a functional adult would know I shouldn't give my girlfriend you know, the record she wanted, but because it was, you know, I'd rather see him be like, oh, you know, either lie and be like, oh, I didn't get it, or I broke it doing something, you know, whatever, you know what I mean? Like it you know, instead of just being like, here, you know, like he's a freaking idiot, you know. I think that's where like we have creators who lean too far into this. Well, Peter's a screw up and can't like do functional things or functionally explain why he screwed up. Like to me, we got to move past that. But like we also seem to have a refusal to move past that every time, especially when we kind of get a reset of the character creatively like this.
It's a sort of Archie-ification of this character. Like there's always going to be a reversion to the norm. I will say, as much as I agree with you on all of that, the thing that like made it work or be less painful for me is that no one really gives him a hard time about it.
No, that's true.
Like they're not beating up on him or being like, I'm so disappointed in you, Peter. Right. Like, and in that regard, like if I really want to no prize this, like it does in that way feel like a continuation to me of the Zeb Wells run, which is like Shay is like, I'm going to date you and I'm not going to ask questions about it. Like, I'm just going to trust that whatever you're doing, you know, like, is true for you. Now, maybe that's not the most healthy like thing to build a relationship on, but that's how it was characterized. And so that feels true here, you know, and she even like playfully, you know, plays with them like, hey, we're 95 minutes into a date and you haven't run out the door yet. You know, like that's the kind of thing a couple like would do. You know, I'm like that with my wife all the time, which is like picking at her, you know, repeated flaws in a way that couples do, you know.
Yes.
Which is maybe not great for the relationship. But.
It sounds healthier in your head than on paper, I swear.
Sure. But whether it's healthy or not, that's the way people are. You know, like in relationships, you know. And like Aunt May at the end of the Zeb Wells run, she kind of like comes to accept like, oh, Peter's life is going to be a shambles, but he's doing good, you know, and he's living up to Uncle Ben. And so when she sees him here, whether this was intentional by Joe Kelly or not, I'm choosing to read into it this way. She doesn't give him crap about it because she trusts Peter in some way. So in that regard, I was like, okay, like maybe accidentally falling into this, but I can at least accept it as the reader, as kind of a following something. I'll take the littlest bit I can get. Anyway, I thought that was, you know, at least fairly solid. So yeah.
All right. You want to give this thing a grade, Dan?
I have been really all over the place about grading this issue or like how I thought about this issue because I truly like, I feel like I need some space from it and to see what comes. And I've been all over the place. But I think I'm giving this a B-.
Okay. I'm giving it a C-. I think I am more firmer in my beliefs about it. I mean, I'm not saying that there isn't potential to grow from this, but you know, like there's a lot that I just struggled with in this book, Dan, and you know, like there are some positives, and that's why it's not lower than in the C range. But like, I think there's a lot of room for improvement here. We'll see if we get it. There's at least how many more issues left of this? 9,
and then there's like there's a point. I think it's like point 8D or something like that, like some new numbering 0.1 that they've got smack dab in the middle.
Well, hopefully
area.
it's not like a Misty Knight and Colleen Wing story.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know how much this editorial team loves that. You know, I think I was sitting on C+ for a long time, and like just talking with you, I'm like kind of realizing like I had fun reading this, and I was in Peter's mind, and like. Again, that's probably massively grading on a curve, but like I had a good time like reading this comic, and that's all I kind of asked for from this stuff mostly. So it kind of notched me up a little bit, but
you can stand by it. I'm a holding.
I don't know that I feel like standing by it. Honestly,
all right.
like
well,
you know, but
we got many issues ahead of us where
you
can go as hard into this as you want to. I just feel like, you know what, like it wasn't totally my jam here. You know, I'm definitely admitting some of this is a me problem, not a Marvel problem or even a Joe Kelly problem. All the same, my grade is what it is. So
Yeah. Yeah, and as this whole like Doom thing, like the one world under Doom, like if this is going to be a major part of that, like this doesn't feel on the level of like Dark Reign.
No.
Like I would want something a little more like interesting than just like Doom has got some like homework that he doesn't want to do and he's going to bully Spider-Man into doing it.
Right.
Like I think there was probably a more interesting thing to do. But again, we're going to see that play out and whether or not it does develop and become something more interesting.
Yep.
But in the meantime, Mark, why don't you take us home?
Sure thing. Well, it's that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, this podcast exists because of the support of our listeners on Patreon. So if you're hearing this the week that this comic came out, that's what our Patreon supporters normally get to experience, is getting the review straight away. So we're giving this one out as like a freebie. And if you want to follow along with Mark and I's journey through the 8 deaths and beyond, maybe consider joining the Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, you can help support our show's existence while getting, like I said, these early episodes, including the reviews, interviews. Like, again, we have 3 interviews already banked in there that have not been released into the normal feed yet. So if you want to consider listening to those things and helping the show out, come join us on the Patreon. So, again, thank you to everybody who already supports us there. Plus, we wanted to extend a special thanks to our newest contributor, Casey Gilman.
Awesome. Thanks, Casey. If you value smart comics criticism and historical analysis, we hope you'll consider supporting us on Patreon. What we do on the show is admittedly niche. Still, we feel that we offer valuable commentary and model fair methods of criticism for a character and medium that rarely receives the kind of consideration we believe it deserves. So if that is valuable to you as it is for us, we can only continue doing what we do with your support on Patreon.
So, Mark, until our palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy, and Spidey is spaghetti, what's our motto?
Oh, man, I think I even understood that reference. With great podcasts, there must also come the amazing Spider Talk.
Take that, Scott Pilgrim. That song is like 20 years old. Rick, cut that.
Leave it in.